This episode of A Beacon of Hope is proudly brought to you by Campfire Studios. To find out more, visit campfirestudios.co.nz. 2, 3, 4. A Beacon of Hope is a weekly podcast that shines a light on the human spirit and explores the power of hope in our lives. Join me, Will Fleming, as I talk to people from all walks of life about where they find hope and how they use it to navigate life's challenges.
Be good, be safe, and be happy.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of A Beacon of Hope. Just a quick admission, is that the right thing to say? I'm just admitting that the pressure's been on, the crunch has been on. I broke. I broke in terms of my run. And what do I mean? Will, what do you mean? You know, I've been trying to aim for a podcast every Wednesday, A Beacon of Hope released digitally every Wednesday. And on this particular week, I think it's my 16th week, maybe my 17th week in a row, I cracked. It's Thursday and I'm getting the podcast out. So I guess all good things come to an end, as they say, and in my case it is my run of having podcasts uploaded every Wednesday. However, that's part of life, right? And the reality of life is just keep going, man. So that's what we're doing. We're keeping going, man. This week on the podcast, I have the pleasure of introducing you to my friend, a very good friend, Alpha Maiava. He is a philosopher. I mean, look, I gave him that name. He's a man of many hats, a family person, but in this episode of A Beacon of Hope, he is a guiding light with all things ancient and wise and beautiful. And I can't wait for you to hear a fraction, a nanosecond of his amazing journey of rediscovering us. Here we go, Alpha. Thank you so much for being a beacon of hope with us today. Enjoy the podcast. Alpha, I don't know how to introduce you because you are truly a man of many hats. As I cut to you and you're wearing a hat, as I cut back to me, I'm just so interested. When you're traveling, what do you write on your boarding pass about who you are and what you do?
That's a really good question, man. I don't know. I feel like I just put down what I do. I just put down entrepreneur, right? Because that's about the only thing I'm kind of comfortable putting down. I've never put down ever that I'm an artist or a creative, because I've always thought that's kind of, and it's all had to do with the kind of way that I was raised, where they look at the art as for bums and for fun and for funerals and for weddings. And so, you know, you are only a serious person when you have a upstanding profession. And so being a muso and a creative should not be on your boarding pass. So I actually put down entrepreneur.
What is an entrepreneur to you? What does that mean? Because we're out here carving our own path for ourselves. Is that entrepreneur?
Entrepreneur to me is you're able to create things that, and no disrespect to those of us who adhere to a profession, where most of us, you know, wake up in the morning and are satisfied with your 9 to 5, or if you're the graveyard shift. And an entrepreneur to me is someone who's got the freedom to just create. According to my interpretation of Alpha's dictionary, that's what I've kind of interpreted entrepreneur as. May not be right, but that's why the rainbow has many colors.
I was listening to a podcast today, and there was a young chap on it talking about his parents. They're from the Pacific realm, and he said that their goal was safety. Their goal was being able to predict what was around the corner. What do you think about that when I say that? Because what we're doing feels like there's less prediction, but I kind of trust that we'll end up somewhere. What do you think about that?
My response to what you just asked me is based on the cultural lens that kind of brought me into this world. Um, and those cultural lenses are always reflected by language and the way in which people live, right? So, if you look at the way people live in Samoa, in particular, we're not used to doing this thing called savings. It is totally a foreign concept. Why is that? See, you have to look at the things that we do in the islands. For instance, when there is a anything to do with a funeral or title bestowment ceremonies or weddings or birthdays, it's the families that come and help you. It's like you just know in your bones that people are going to come and contribute, right? And because that's the natural way of a lot of these communal livings that is the society that brought me into this world. So when I hear things like, looking for safety net, you are looking for safety net when you are not attached to a community who already have certain principles and ways to go about life. Now, in no way my answer is saying that your friends' parents were detached from their community, but the reality is a lot of Moana, um, we work with nature. We don't try because planning and looking for safety is a way to try to contain nature according to how I should be comfortable by planning ahead. Whereas in the Moana way has always been working with nature as in whatever tomorrow may brings, that's just how things will go. Samoa has a very famous saying. It goes, "E pule lava si tafu nei le lauro na sa." Si tafu nei is Samoa's translation of the name Stefan. Now, the legend goes Stefan was a German who ended up in our shores many years ago. And Stefan liked to get on his little catamaran or yacht, whatever it is, dinghy, and he would have a little nightcap during the middle of the day. And the nightcap was so strong that he would fall asleep in the middle of his wa or waka. And it says that if you ask Stefan, where are you traveling today? He would always say, wherever the sail takes me. So the locals then said, well, Stefan, he will go wherever the sail of his canoe will go. So even those languages tell you that we've always surrendered and adhered to the wind because it is a foreign concept. Saving, trying to plan for tomorrow. And I'm not saying that our people didn't plan. It's just that our way of planning was, let's see what the weather's like tomorrow.
So what does that mean in the modern context of our current situation? And me and you talk about this often, but I guess I want to try and relate it to A, this conversation, and B, the topic of hope. Because if you have to go where the wind blows, but we've blocked all the wind because of our concrete jungle, there's going to be a negative outcome there.
True, but I've always say that when I am faced with those sort of scenarios, I always think, what did my people do? Because these concrete jungles are just another interpretation of barriers. And every part of life, there's always a barrier. It could be, it's been raining for so long, the trees are wet, we're just unable to cut them down so we can carve a waka so we can then advance to the next island because the guy that lived next to me just continues to piss me off for the last 10 years, right? It's a form of concrete. Concrete jungle in itself represents barriers that stops you in the way from pursuing whatever your A to B looks like. So for me, when I look at the reality of today, I can only measure it according to my worldview. And in my worldview of the Moana life, if I am to be honest to the way of my people, concrete jungle represents opportunities to revisit other mind frames and how to attack problems that in your Western learning, you can go up and up about it, but things don't change. Right? So if I were to look at it, I understand why we need to plan nowadays because times have changed, things have evolved. But we're only living in an era of a world that is millions of years old. Right? So the reality is the problems that you and I think are unique, it's just unique by outlook, but the word problem and challenge has always been there. So why don't we kind of look at what people did before and then sort of interpret it to today and see if you can find something there along the line. For me, part of how I navigate what we now call the challenges or the problems of this stuck Western concept of a world that we live in is I go back to the only thing I know 100% that I didn't need to learn. English I had to learn. Western concepts I had to learn. But what are the things natural to me? What's natural to me is connectivity, is knowing that I may want to cross the river, but everything that God has given me or the atua, I am unable to. But hey, there is someone next door to me who has a skill that might allow me to cross and get past the concrete jungle, who just may need something that I'm good at. That's always been the Moana way. We call it the barter system, but it's a communal way of living. It's the original way of trading, and it's always have been the original ways to traverse problems that we come across. If this is a conversation of, if you're stuck and you're looking for hope, how can you kind of get over the barrier that you were already in? Well, you're stuck when you decide not to coexist, if that makes any sense. And that doesn't mean coexisting will have to be with people that are blood to you. Blood doesn't form guaranteed relationships. Sometimes family and safety is what you can make on your own, right? So that could be people that grew up different circles than you, but you have similar. Because remember, even if you're born in the same house, we're born of different musical tunes, no? There are things that my dad likes and drives him that I find absolute annoying. But he'll still be my dad, but it doesn't mean he's the one that's going to fight my battles for me forever.
I think I know what you should write on your boarding pass. Philosopher. I just clicked that that's how I see you. You are someone who is, when I talk to you, I always get a feeling that there is a bigger system in place. I actually believe that, Alpha, and we've talked about this before, that there is a bigger plan. I just don't think it's the one that is the dominant story. I think it's more something like an energy or something like that. And I'm keen to know what you think about that, because when I've explored the topic of hope and optimism, it really comes down to the things that people don't think are real, like whatever we might call love or trust. Hope is thinking that something might happen tomorrow. And I guess we have to be careful not to call it a wish, wishful thinking. And I mean, if you can tie a little bit of your talent or skill into hope, you can really fast forward your life, and I'm trying to prove that by my interactions with you, where we live life on our terms or the closest we can possibly do, and that the universe will bend to us in some way and in weird ways. But what's your general thoughts when I talk like this? Because I don't actually know what I'm talking about, but I feel like I'm talking about something that is definitely there.
It's always an interesting topic of conversation. It's also a funny thing to talk about and talk around, because I think one of the first thing I've always recognized is, um, and this sounds very cliche, right? But there are just as many ways to go about life as there are colors of the rainbow, if not way more than colors of the rainbow. So if you are to consider that as some kind of truth, because I consider those things as truth, right? Then when it comes to hope, it always reminds every time I feel like, man, I don't know if this is. If this is the way to go about it, or I don't know where I'm going, which is fine for me. But I always find that the only way you can experience and find hope is by literally taking a stab at the things that maybe there's a degree it might work or it might not. You know what I mean? I'm just talking about in my head when I think about the topic of hope, and when I come across a situation where there is a bit of aspiration of what I'd like it to become, because that's also a definition of hope. It's like, what's the opposite of hope, for instance?
Fear, is it?
Okay, fear.
But, is it?
I don't know, because someone said to me that the opposite of fear is faith,
Hmm. I
right?
mean,
Because
faith.
they have exactly the same thing, right? Because faith is anticipating something is about to happen that has not yet happened. And fear is also anticipating something is about to happen that has not yet happened. It just depends on what are the outcomes you are, or where do you lean towards when you think about these two F's. When you look at an unknown, do you fear or do you hope, I guess, or have faith and hope that what the thing that you'd like to happen will happen? And as we know in life, every time you hope for something to happen, you get a degree and a percentage of it, right? But it's enough for you to go, oh, yeah, I made the right choice. Even though you were only given 5%, but at least it's better than getting 5% of fear. So, yeah.
It's interesting, because you brought up faith, and when I think about it, if someone said faith meant hope, I'd be like, yep, I believe that. Because faith actually requires you to take a step, and I don't know if this is going to make sense or if I just sound tired because it is 10:30 at night, but hope is like faith to me, that if you just hope and don't do anything, nothing will happen. But if you hope that when you take a step towards hope, something will happen, I believe
Yeah.
that to be true.
Hope is the aspiration, faith is the action. Man, I hope it's going to come through. And then I have faith that the amount of work that I put in, the experiences that I have, I've got faith that it's going to come through, right? So it's almost like hope is the aspiration of this is what I'd like to have. And faith is uh, the amalgamation of all the various hopes that you've had throughout, where you arrive to the point where you're now confident. Man, I got faith in me, right? We always people say that I've got faith in you because you know that without you, this thing will not happen. And if you don't believe in you, well, you wouldn't get to where you know what I mean? So I've always sort of look at these two things and goes, all right. So hope is, it's like the dreaming, and faith is the action part of that.
Are we allowed to talk a little bit about the work you're about to do in the Moana around music? Or is that
Yeah,
to be
well,
talked about later?
we can now. It's been
I don't
announced.
want to. I guess I want to ask two things. One is you're about to go on this continued mission that you've been on to rediscover these ancient instruments that I think held more than just sound. But I'll let you kind of talk about that. But can I also ask you, is one of the things I have never really come across, I'd say this is quite a philosophical conversation, and I keep thinking to myself, how cool would it be if we had a philosophy-based podcast, especially through a Pacific lens? I think that'd be so wild. But have you come across Pacific Island philosophers? And is there Pacific Island philosophy like people cite Aristotle and stuff like that?
In that sense, no, or maybe I have, but never really quite invested into them. Um, but there are people of similar gifts uh, in my culture, and also in Te Ao Marama, Te Ao Māori. I met a lot of kaumatuas and some of the leaders that they have the gift of, but philosophies based on tikanga and the relationship, right? Um, so, but in terms of if you were to look at an example of the box of the Aristotle or the Homer or these sort of, look, without a doubt we do, right? Without a doubt we do. You cannot circumnavigate this entire Moana without having philosophers. And philosophers in the Moana context are not just those who have the ability to look at the world and interpret what they see more than their other fellow man and woman, because they have other different gifts, but also a lot of our philosophers are hands-on. Put it this way: when the missionaries and the Western, when the two cultures came together, that is the Moana culture and the Western culture came together in its various forms in 1800s, 1700s, and 1600s. We at that time, everything was oratory, and we depended on these philosophers to not only learn how to carve the vase, to build them, to give inspiration to those who are about to sail into unknown waters, but to also learn how to interpret the stars. And as we know, these were also a lot of the trades that these early philosophers, astronomy and all of these sort of wisdoms had. And I think people like Aristotle is because they were able to read the stars the same way that our Kaumatuas and our papas and our mamas did. It's just that we output the results of us having this power according to the need of the land. Aristotle at that time was one of the times when democracy was born, or where the Greek philosophy of human rights, I mean, it's not them because that's the Persians, but it influenced their culture because the Persians did come before them, and the philosophy of Xerxes and all of that. Whereas our philosophers needed to respond because we are living in the largest body of water in the world. And so we exercised and tangibilize whatever blessings they had into navigation. The story of Tupaia, he's a philosopher. He was a philosopher. He was an astronomer, but he was also a priest in the ways of our people. Exactly the same thing as Aristotle was to his era. So have I met? Do I know? Yes. Have they existed in our culture? Yes. It's just that their duties and the output of their blessings required them to respond to the land and the surroundings that they were differently than how Aristotle used his gifts. One of the challenges that we have now, Will, is a lot of our people are now loving what westernization gives us because it makes life a little bitter. Hey, that's why in the context of Samoa, we always encourage our kids, hey, when you grow up, marry a Palangi, because they don't have fa'alavilavis. They don't have, people pass away in their world too, but you don't need to give an arm and a leg or sell one of the kids just to give. Palangis, when you die, you cry, you bury, goodbye. But for us, holy, we show you more love when you're dead than when you're alive, right? And so when we you know what I mean? And times are hard these days. It's expensive to buy a box of bloody mackerel, and so we the human mind. How do you survive? By finding ways to move within the cracks of every storm that comes your way. And if you live long enough, all right, let's start something anew. So that's part of the reason why a lot of our belief in existing philosophers have kind of waned now. Mm-hmm. We're going after the TikTok videos of, oh, that guy's so powerful and my Lord, and so inspirational. Actually, no, the stories of your people are a lot older than that. But because you've never been planted into your identity as such, you will always find value in other things other than where your feet came out.
It's all good to have strategies and tools and tactics until the wheels fall off, until the waka is sinking. And then you have to trace back, right? So how I've identified it is when the wheels fall off, you trace back to your support network or your buffer, and if that's not good, then you trace back again to maybe your religion. And if that's not good, you trace all the way back to what was before that, And that's my challenge here, or my problem actually, is that, let's say Western culture can trace all the way back to their made-up gods, or, the ones that we make Marvel movies about now. And that might be interesting and fun and entertainment until the wheels fall off. Then they've got a 1,000-year history categorized, even marvelized. And when our wheels fall off, statistically we don't have the buffers. Then what do we lean on? And I guess that's what I'm really interested with you is I get a sense, and I've never said it to you because it's coming out in this talanoa or conversation, that you're trying to restore some of these really ancient arts, ancient thoughts. So when the wheels fall off, we can trace our way back.
You said it better than I was trying the last 2 minutes. Well, I mean, as you know, in our personal relationship, the reason why it's so important to me to pursue I've always looked at it like this, right? I remember one time when I was researching around food, right? And, it's always funny where I learn these things, the oddest places. And because, my son's medical condition requires a change of diet just because his movement was slow. So we had to get foods that wouldn't trigger his tummy so quickly. So, of course, we had to cut him off dairy because like every other islander, and I think apparently about 97% of the world, we are lactose intolerant, right? That's absolutely a thing. And I think it's even more so for Pacific Islanders. Us and cow's milk, we just ain't good friends. The minute you go past 5 years old, stop drinking milk, man. Or drink soy or eat a tree. But in that research, I found out that, only certain parts of the world are able to withstand dairy for a longer period of time. Because apparently the way they were living, they farmed it longer, so it became a part of them. And it got me thinking about allergies. I think I told you this story, right? One of the biggest signs to show that you're allergic to something is like a swelling face, all right. And I've always thought, if I were to look at the photos of my people, when I say my people, I mean the Moana as a whole. The 1900s, this was before the canned food and the exploitation of meat, all of that came into the island. Man, there was not a single gym in the islands, but they had 8-packs of 8-packs. I mean, they were healthy. They there was complete wellness in there. And if you trace it down the way they eat, right? We are the original pescatarians because chicken was brought into the island, beef and cow and to the tongue is a horse. But the whole point is these things were brought into the island. So the question then goes, what did we eat before that? Simple. We ate land and we ate from the Moana. Again, making us the original pescatarian. You know for a fact that when you touch something that causes an allergic reaction for you, it'll show. So I've always tell people, I'm not a big man. This is just the output of, because I'm really allergic to these food types that I eat. It shows because it causes conditions in me because I'm not supposed to eat these things. Now, when I take it back to my point of where we play the strongest, we play the strongest when we're in the environment where we're meant to be and we play according to that. So when people look at how do we navigate these places and why do I look at life and have a little bit more zest in it than I did before in my younger years, it's because now I've come back to the ways of my people, knowing in that place, in my Turanga Waiwai, and where I was born and bred, according to the climate and the way of my people, I'm going to be my best self. The greatest part of it, it has become, because it's been taken away from me for so long, as I rediscover it, I'm finding my wellness is coming back more and more and more. So even if you were raised up in another culture or in another background that's not yours, that's not your fault. But if you belong to a group, to an existence, to an environment that genetically is part of you, I bet you, if you start to re-explore those things again, not only will you be adding more arrows to your bow, but you will find solutions and ways to navigate the current environment that you were raised in that were built around these concrete jungles. If you remember, I've always talked about the clock. All right? I've always had this theory where I sat down and I always thought, man, why do we always have this saying, ooh, Man, hey, did you get work done today? Man, I ran out of time. Right? Oh, if only I had more time. And part of they've actually identified part of the contribution to stress is it's not the amount of work, but it's the brain trying to achieve everything within the 24-hour Greenwich clock. Right? Now, this takes me back to my point of playing to the strength of the environment. You were planted where you were born for a reason. Right? So when I look at the clock of the Western world, the Palangi clock, and then I look at the Moana clock. In the Moana clock, everything was measured around crops. Right? I know damn well if I plant taro in January, whether I have an app or not, I ain't gonna eat that goddamn taro until June. So the whole point of that is I surrender to the 6 months for the taro it takes to grow until I have it. I can't stress out about it because it ain't no point. It's not gonna turn up in May or April, right? So the Moana clock is it's the art of surrender. The same way you asked me before, safety. I would need to plan for safety if I do not have an environment where it already has systems and things in places where it's always been my safety net kind of thing, right? So when I look at the Moana clock, if our people would stop running towards the 24-hour clock, we will be a lot more healthier in the mind and spirit, first and foremost. Why? Because that's the way of where we were brought into this world. So when I look for hope, I don't look at in the lens that has caused me to stress out in the first place. I go look in it in the ways of where I came into this earth, the culture that brought me into. Or even if you did grow up in an environment that wasn't safe, don't worry about it in a way, right? I mean, that's not the only way for you to live. There are the plethora of other ways for you to choose that fits your song.
It's beautiful, man. I just really love talking to you because, I guess you just have a way of talking about things which makes me feel hopeful, and I don't think that, I think most people think, oh, that's cheesy or doesn't really mean anything, but if you read the studies, just like you are what you eat, they also say you are what you think. And they also say you are the 5 people around you. And these are like the richest people on earth who talk like this. And it's funny how, we don't take that seriously. Someone asked me yesterday, if your life was a movie and you had the last line and it was a message to your kids, what would you say? And I was really stumped because I was like, wow, that's intense. And all that came to mind was trust your gut. And I thought on some level that's so silly because no one walks around saying trust your gut. They walk around saying trust an algorithm or a modeler who has spent their career, an academic who has spent their career looking at charts. Except when it's all said and done, trusting your gut is the correct thing to do, And maybe if you haven't trusted it in a while, it might take you off course, but I just think I've been saying this word or this phrase for 3 days in a row. We've got to take that stuff deadly serious. And, it really will help you through. Do you trust your gut, Alpha?
The answer to that question is the story of the 2 wolves.
A Cherokee child approached his grandfather, who was sitting by a campfire. The boy was furious because he thought he had been subjected to an injustice. His grandfather asked the boy to sit down because he wanted to tell him a story. He said that inside the boy were 2 wolves in a constant fight. One of them was kind and just, living in harmony with those around him. When something displeases him, he does not allow it to affect his spirit. This wolf only fights when it is the right answer. The other wolf is irritable and barks at everyone. Everything that displeases him makes him angry. His rage is so great that he can't use reason when he gets out of hand. By feeding these wolves, they become stronger and stronger. The boy asked which of the two wolves will win the fight, and the grandfather answered, "The one you decide to feed."
So, do I trust my gut? It's not only is it situational, but it depends on which of the two wolves I fed the most up to that moment. Because when, for instance, public speaking, do I trust my gut? Absolutely. Because for that wolf to start enjoying and believing in itself, it would have had to go through some battles of blabbing, failing, losing lines in the middle of speeches, right? So by the time I now approach anything that I speak at, that wolf is seasoned. When it comes to things that I still consider opportunities, I've yet to develop a way to stand on it properly. The wolf that will probably dominate is fear and nerves. And I suck at this. What the hell am I doing here? So I'm also aware that for me to tell my kids to trust their gut, I would have to train that gut so that by the time that gut knows how to choose, it would have come from a place of, it would have come from an environment where it allows itself to make discerned decisions. Right. If I am to let my kids up now and the lack of knowledge that they do have, and I remove myself from the picture and let them go through the world, I don't know how they're going to turn up. So their gut might be a decision that's going to shut down the internet. All right. So do I trust my gut? Yes, I do, but I'm also human. Susceptible to making decisions, but will I ever stop? Never, because that's the fun part of it. Right? And I've had to, like yourself, you've been through a lot of moments to build this character that you have now that's elastic. Like, I still panic when things happen. That's the human part. That's the pinch to let you know you're alive. But I don't stay in it for very long. Like, if I take a wrong turn, as a simple example, I'll swear, I'll cuss, I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And then I come down and always try to find my way back to where I was. That's always been my approach to everything I do for the last 10, 15 years. A little bit of growing up since marrying my wife. I met someone else who has a brain smarter than mine, or her talent is to tell my brain where it needs to go to perform the best. And the outcome of that, I'm trusting my gut a little bit more because I'm starting to turn out positive results to the point where I now know my gut and I, Obi-Wan and the apprentice, are now very aware of each other and their roles. And the last time we were in tune like this, good things happen. So in straight answer, yes, I do trust my gut, but I also trust it with reservation, recognizing the challenges of growth that I do not have attained or have achieved yet.
Because I get the feeling I could talk to you for hours, literally, but I think we need to find a way to tie it all together. So I've got two kind of things to maybe focus on. One is how we met. We met through Inga the Winger, for those who follow rugby and are old enough to know what that name means to all cultures in Aotearoa. A connector, a person who loved as hard as he lived. And we met because of a project that will probably never see the light of day, that was this kind of ultimate Kardashians reality show about Inga's battle to health, to be healthy. How do you talk about that whole journey when we're on a podcast that has to wrap up soon?
You're going to have to cut me off when it's time. But so here's the thing, right? And I know people who will ever see this some will find that it depends on a level of maturity on how you look at the spiritual aspect and see how things come together and understand that things will happen to bring things together that were meant to come together, but it could only come through this pathway. You know what I mean? If whenever I think about the Inga podcast and everything that we were trying to achieve, I get inspired. I feel inspired by Inga. Just the zest of life that he had leading up to that moment, right? He was ready to grab life, both hands, and he was going at it. But I think the biggest thing for me, and this is not being cheesy, brother, it almost as if me and you coming together to work with and alongside Inga was the only pathway that the universe wrote of when will meet Alpha. Like, I'm sure we would have passed each other. We would have, because you have to understand, right? Too many things have happened where that has come into a reality. But unfortunately, it almost as if when I think about Inga, I always think about this. Inga existed so that you and I could come together, and however he was meant to exit this life, his purpose towards that particular part of his life was the bus that you and I both got on, so that the bus, though it will go on, you and I will now remain connected. So there are two things that I explained there. One is I feel inspired by Inga, just the zest of life that he had towards that period. We didn't even know, but we were getting ready to shoot season 2. But in overall, in his exit, you and I entered each other's lives. So I look at things differently. You know what I mean? Like, there are things that have happened that have it for a big reason. So that's my answer to that. I don't even know whether it's the right one, but things needs to happen for things to come together.
And it's a nice way to look at life, you know, nice being like you can choose to look at it through a lens of maybe the opposite to hope is hopelessness, which is what they cite as a contributing factor to things like suicide. When you've I call it the wheels coming off, but having no hope or hopelessness, a loss of faith in life really, is such a wild concept. It's the most wild concept I can think of. And it's so wild that I did a 15-episode podcast on it and got funding for it, because that's how wild it is, that the government will put money to a nobody like me to go and attempt to find. But you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? There's some smart people in this world, and there's some smart people in Aotearoa, and that concept of suicide, for example, is so wild. It's so wild that they'll even let people like me have a go at trying to unlock this cryptic key. And I think I unlocked it. You know, I talked to lots of smart people, and they said to me, what gives people hope is having someone like you described, you know, a partner in life, a wife, a friend, for you to let some of that steam out. And that's why I think, Alpha, we're missing these keys in life. I think that's within the music, these instruments that you're talking about. I think they hold the keys to, maybe it's the instruments were to introduce you to people, were to help you find your person. So when the wheels fall off, it's funny how the wheels, it should be something smarter, like when the sail breaks, you can create wind.
I'm a very literal person. So let me tell you, one of the things I don't include in my life are vocabs like when the wheels fall off. Why? I grew up in the water. You'll never run out of water. When you are stuck in one path, there's a bigger ocean for you to chart somewhere else. The water will never stop you. It will redirect you, but it will always be there. Now, wheels, you need it to get from A to B physically, whereas the Moana, it's there for you to manipulate it to however you need to live your life. So when you change from the wheels fall off to, actually, I live in a wheelless world. I live in a Moana where there's always something. I need the Moana to swim, to bathe. If I'm hungry, I can eat from the Moana. If I need inspiration, I look at the Moana. If I'm feeling anxious, what do? They always say, be calm like water. That saying is actually not from Bruce Lee, but it also comes from a Fijian saying about water. the power of water. So my thing is always this: when I look at things that exist in that realm, I convert it to things that make sense to me. Because when I look at giving people or sharing something with someone to make them feel better, I talk from the sense that there's so much bigger that you'll never run out of. All right. So maybe if the wheels keep falling off, change the canoe. Because the ocean will always give. No matter what you do to it, it will always give. Yes, it will take life, but it will always give life. And it's big enough for everyone else to be on it. And I think sometimes anxiety, when you feel alone, is when you think your world is that small and no one else understands you and you're alone in these problems. But when you're looking at it from a Moana perspective, my Lord, the ocean is massive. It's got enough room for all of me, no matter how it is that you get into the water. The water don't care if you get into the water and you're angry. You got issues. You got mad at Johns for not paying you on time. All right. Those instruments, it's part of the connectivity. That's why in my earlier answer to you when we started is hope comes with having the ability to coexist with people. And you've got the right to choose who you coexist with. That's why I always tell people, sometimes Pacific Islanders always say, oh, what's important to you? Family. Not really. Because family is also the sense of abuse, the sense of harm for a lot of us. But we're so tuned to always trust family that even though family is the part of the pain, we hold on to it because of some ideology that is stuck in evolution. And the more cultures and outside forces that come and impact it, if your feet aren't planted in your culture, not so much your family, then you will always need to lock yourself into something because you remove it, there goes your existence in this world. So that's what I always tell people, family, great. But remember, it's also a known source of trauma. So expand your horizon. Be someone from the Moana. If the environment that you grew up in that you could not control is the cause of your harm, leave them behind. All right? Love you, but I got to go. I'll love you from a distance because coming close to you, it ain't good for my life. You will always be my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad. But I'm going to go family other forces that are in line with how I want to live. Now, I know it's easier said than done because there are those of us in our communities that just don't, or maybe do not have the braveness to go out there and do it. And that's because of an environment they were being in the whole time. But yeah, that's why I always look at things from the perspective of the water.
I love it, man. I love it so much. And, the true impact that needs to happen is, you hear statistics like 80% of kids in Otara, for example, haven't been to the beach. And it's really, it's so wild that you think it might not be true. But of course, statistics are scarily true. And I think we think that stuff doesn't matter. Another weird thing I worked out about Otara is there's a creek in Otara that used to be tidal before they blocked it off. I spoke to a lady who remembers catching mullet there, right, before it became a dumping ground. And someone said, how you know that that's polluted? Because all the buildings are facing the other way from it. And the picture they said was drive down Mission Bay and all the houses are facing the water. And look in Otara and all the houses are facing away from the water. And I mean, if you needed evidence as to how important water is, the richest people build facing the water. And that's the evidence. And we just don't take it deadly serious enough, but you do. And that's why I love you, man, because you're going to go after these heavy topics. And one of the heaviest ones that I want to do in another podcast is the visions you have around faith and belief. And personally, it really excites me. And it's a bit of a maybe teaser to our next chat because, the Christian stuff and whatever else just never sits well with me because it's like I get it, but I don't get it, And I'm looking for something deeper. I'm looking for something where my DNA is connected to that in a way that I can feel it when I talk about it, like when you talk about it with me. So before I tempt you to go down that path, maybe just blink twice if we're okay to talk about that next time. That was some... sorry for audio listeners, he was blinking. Finally, a tradition that we've had on this podcast, because it all came about that my mum was my beacon of hope, and I only realized that, like most things in life, once she passed, that she installed me with this buffer of optimism, that it gets broken sometimes, and I have to pay out quite a lot in different scenarios, but it is an optimism of love and hope and that things can be better and that things happen good sometimes. But one of the things I did is I recorded her, but I never got her to say she loved me. And she did say she loved me a lot growing up, but I should have got her to say that in a recording. So I asked my guests to take a second and tell someone they love, maybe it's your wife or your kids. Can you say it on this podcast to them so that it's captured somewhere on the internet, so that one day when someone stumbles across this conversation, they'll be like, oh, he says he loves me. Can you do that for us, Alpa?
Okay. Well, look, similar to you, I grew up in a family where I grew up in Samoa, man. I've never heard my parents tell me they love me, and it was important to me because I didn't know any better. So as a result, when I became a parent, I tell my kids every day I love them. And also, like you said, I am blessed to have married someone who educated me about love, taught me how to be love, and showed me what love looks like, that I'm comfortable with, and we managed to weave into a love that works for our family. So my kids know I love them. So, but Zacchaeus, Yamina, and Shianyana, the love that Dad tells you here is only a portion of the love you've experienced every day since you've come to this world. And if you are seeing this in a time when me and Mommy are no longer around, I know deep in my heart that you testify to the love that we've been giving you. But regardless of that, just know that I love you, that we love you very much, and hope that that love will carry you to all the things that the world says it's impossible, but it will help you exceed, excel, and conquer. Daddy loves you.
You better add your wife in.
Of course, that's why I say we. You see, this is the thing. The Palangi concept is I love you. The Moana is we, because I cannot love without the woman who showed me love. So the love I speak of is me to talk about, but is empowered by really the one who showed me how to love. So my darling Forepau, to honor the wise words of Will, I want you to know that I love you very much. And I hope that you will never run out of love, because I draw from it too much every day. And I know it, and I'm sorry. And I'm going to keep drawing for more of it until, knowing you're never going to run out of that well anyway. So love you, darling. Yeah.
I feel like saying amen to that. Beautiful brother, thank you so much for being our beacon of hope in this episode, and being a beacon of hope for me. Our friendship has, it's made me a better person by hanging out with you and learning from you, and you being open to me calling at all hours of the day to say, am I Pacific enough? And you growl me and say, stop that kind of talk and carry on this journey. But your willingness to share the knowledge is, I think, something I really value. So until next time, my friend, thank you so much.
Okay, brother.
This episode of A Beacon of Hope is proudly brought to you by Campfire Studios. Campfire Studios is an impact-led organisation amplifying the voices of Māori and Pasifika communities via podcasting and video content. To find out more, visit campfirestudios.co.nz. 2, 3, 4. Thank you for tuning in to this frequency of hope in our podcast today. If you found value from this episode and want to hear more, I would love it if you could follow, subscribe, and rate our show. By doing so, you will increase the frequency of the Beacon of Hope. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform, please take a moment to hit the follow or subscribe button and leave a rating and review. I truly appreciate your support and feedback, and it helps us make our podcast even better. Thank you.
Be good. Be safe. And be happy. Yeah. Sounds like that song, doesn't it? Be happy.
All right, Mama, we'll stop there, eh?
Yeah, okay. All right.